Welcome back to the Code Ryan podcast today. Jonas joins me here, and I was trying to get my pronunciation right before the podcast, but I still totally mess it up. But I'll make sure to have his stuff linked in the description below if any of you guys want to check him out and you can't understand what name I just said. So with that, a good place for us to start here, man, is, just kind of a rough background on kind of what your tech story looks like so far and kind of how you got into software development and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, well, thank you for having me, first of all. And I think the pronunciation was quite well, so don't worry about it. So I started to get into tech by after or during my high school time. I wanted to find a way to make some money on the side. So I started creating static websites for small businesses around my place in Germany. And eventually it got more and more complicated. They wanted more features, so I kind of drifted into JavaScript as well, and got a lot of more ideas what you can do with it, and needed some more stuff to do. And then eventually I also worked with React because it made my life a lot easier in this case. So this is basically my front-end framework of choice. And after doing a lot of small clients, I kind of stopped doing that and mostly then switched to working with bigger clients for longer times, helping teams solve problems, learn a lot from other team members, hopefully teach them some things as well. Yeah, but this is basically the way I got into tech, just building static websites for businesses, and then it just got more complicated, and then eventually I just went the front-end route and also a little bit of back-end, but mostly front-end.
Gotcha. So currently, do you mainly just work as more so like a freelancer? So you have your own clients, you find your own clients. So you're not necessarily employed with a W-2 or anything like that. It's just kind of freelancing.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm doing full-time freelancing for the last years. Yeah. At the beginning, as I said, the smaller clients, and then I just got for bigger clients, doing full-time freelancing currently for a startup. They are doing things in motorsports, so quite interesting field of work for me. But different clients, but mostly for a year or more than that. So we can really get something going, find problems together, and really improve something.
And how have you been enjoying going kind of the freelance route compared to more of the kind of employed route? I'm sure there's maybe pros and cons between them both. Freelance route, there's maybe a little bit more on your shoulders to where you have to find your own clients maybe. I'm not sure how that's kind of set up for you and stuff. But how would you kind of maybe compare going the freelance route compared to, just going the standard 9-to-5 job, so to speak?
Yeah. I mean, for me, because I kind of started as a freelancer, and because of that, I kind of had to set up everything. So all these legal kind of works I already did quite at the beginning. So this is normally for a lot of people a deal breaker to do that. So I was lucky because I already had all of that. And then for the rest, I kind of like going to conferences, to meetups, speaking with people, giving own talks, helping others out. And and by doing that, I mostly just get also some new contracts to work on. I mean, the last years, it was quite easy. A lot of companies were just writing you on LinkedIn. It kind of changed the last year a bit, so I didn't get as many messages as before, but now it seems to get better. I get more messages again. So yeah, mostly just people asking me if I can help them.
Gotcha. And my guess is a lot of that is related to the general tech market kind of took a hit in the last year or so, to where a lot of large companies were having kind of big layoffs and stuff, and I think that kind of bled into maybe some of your clients and stuff like that. Maybe we're kind of tightening up a little bit and not maybe hiring out freelancers and stuff as readily. But it's also good to hear that has kind of been improving for you here a little bit. And yeah, now we have different AI tools that some people are worried about taking all of our jobs and stuff. And I'd be interested. Like, I know we did discuss this beforehand, but what are your thoughts? Do you think AI is gonna take over jobs and we're not gonna have anything to do here in a few years, or what do you kind of think about the whole AI developer and replacing our jobs and stuff?
So to be honest, I'm not that worried. I mean, the code it's mostly trained on is also not like perfect code, and the output it gets is also not perfect. So I guess most of the time it actually needs someone that checks out, okay, is that code really working? Are there some security flaws in it? So I'm not worried that our jobs get taken away, kind of, but maybe that the tooling around our jobs, so like the IDEs, uh, whatever you use, also like if you create like a merge request, maybe the descriptions get automatically created or things like that. So I think it will improve our jobs, and I think it will be a good time. I probably have a good time using it, but I'm not really afraid that we get like that we don't have any jobs left for us. Maybe it could even be like the other way around, that because more people can kind of start creating their like software, and by that can easily create like companies, and then they need devs again to like get good working code and get rid of all the bugs that were introduced by maybe not so well written code. So I think it's a good opportunity for all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like your optimism for sure. Like, you'll hear some people that are much more like doom and gloom about it, like AI is going to take everybody's job in the next few years. I would say I am definitely more so with you, to where I think that, you know, it's definitely going to increase developer productivity. And I think it already has. Like, I know there are times where I use ChatGPT to like, hey, write this React component, and it gets pretty close. Like, it gets a lot of the syntax right. So I don't have to go look up, okay, how the heck does use effect work in React again? And it like will structure that out for me. It's like, okay, that looks right. That's how that works. So I definitely think that these AI tools are going to increase productivity, but I still think it's a long ways away from just like completely replacing developers. And if you think about like um, just with new programming languages, new frameworks, new IDEs, and better tooling for developers, all of that has increased our productivity, but demand for developers is still super high. So it's like that increase in productivity, like you said, leads to more people creating applications and much more software being created. And if more software is being created, you could argue that demand for software developers and engineers is still going to be very high. So I'm definitely in your camp there, and hopefully I'm not just biased because my income relies on software engineering. But I guess time will tell here. So cool. Sorry for that tangent there, but I appreciate hearing your perspective on that.
No, I think it's quite an interesting topic for, I guess, all of us. We're all thinking about it, I guess.
For sure. Cool. Well, it sounds like you kind of started with smaller clients, and then some of those clients started asking for more kind of features and more interactivity for the web pages, I'm guessing. And that kind of led you down the JavaScript route. And then JavaScript kind of led you to React. And then I also know that you've kind of done some stuff with GraphQL, and you've had like some conference talks on maybe some mistakes that can be made with GraphQL and React. So kind of leading into this conversation, maybe we could just start with what is GraphQL, and how did you get like introduced to it, and why did you like think it was cool to start using it?
Yeah, so first of all, GraphQL is kind of a way how you can communicate with your backend. Like, most people use REST APIs, but you can also use gRPC, but you can also use GraphQL. So it's a way how to communicate with your backend. And in the front end, it's basically like a query language, but it works a bit differently compared to REST. So, I mean, in REST, you just have like several endpoints, and there you get different data back. But this data you get back is kind of fixed. I mean, you can pass some parameters or for filtering, sorting, whatsoever. But GraphQL works a bit differently. So you kind of have one endpoint, and there you can ask for different information back. So, and the cool thing is you can define whatever you want to get back, and then you get these information back that you need. And what is quite handy is that when after a while you kind of notice, okay, I don't need this information more on this in this component or on this page, you can just remove parts of the query and ask for less data, or if you need more data, you can ask for more data. So it's quite flexible how you like what you get returned from a query, or the same like when you want to do a mutation of some data, you can also specify like what data you want to get returned after the mutation was successful. So it's a quite handy way to communicate with the backend, because backend developers just have to make sure that they give you resolvers for parts of the data that you want, and then in your query you can like pick, okay, I want this resolver, and in this resolver I just want these fields. So you're very flexible in what you're asking for. And how I got oh yeah, sorry, go ahead, Ryan, and then I continue the next one.
No, I was just gonna kind of summarize there to where it's like, so and I'm not super familiar with GraphQL. I've used it in just like a couple of like very rudimentary demo applications to just kind of play around with it. But my understanding is that, like, with a typical REST API, so the way that you communicate with your backend, I really like how you kind of put that. GraphQL is like a different way to communicate with your database and your backend. But with like a RESTful API, you're going to make like a GET request, a POST request, a DELETE request, and you're going to make that request to a certain URL. And then you might have like certain query parameters, like you said, like filter equals ascending, or ordering equals name to order by name, or different things like that. Whereas with GraphQL, at least with my very beginner knowledge on it, it's almost like the structure that you send to GraphQL is kind of like what you get back. So like you send it kind of looks like a JavaScript object, and you send that to your backend, and it returns you like a very similarly structured object of what you want to get back. Does that sound like I'm in the ballpark of what's going on there?
Yeah, perfect summarization, I would say.
Cool. And then how did you kind of decide to go towards GraphQL? Like, did you find that you were having issues with kind of a more RESTful API approach to where you needed like some more kind of flexibility and some more power from the front end? Or why did you kind of decide to go the GraphQL route?
So for me, like how I started GraphQL, first of all, was I was still building some small static websites for clients, mostly with React. And at this time, a good idea to like build the static websites was using Gatsby. I mean, some people are still using it. Some are using Astro or Next.js or whatsoever. But for me, at this time, it was quite handy. And during that time, GraphQL was like big hype. Everyone wanted to use GraphQL, and Gatsby also used it to like when you wanted to create your static pages and want to get some information from your CMS, like content management system, you had to get this information by using GraphQL. And this was like the first time I got started using GraphQL, but that was just for like queries. So you just got data, but you didn't update anything in Gatsby. And then later on for other clients, bigger ones, I mostly used REST endpoints with the backend to communicate. So I mean, it was mostly a decision by the team beforehand, because I mostly join companies when they are already worked a lot on their project, and don't start up everything. I mean, for one I did, but they decided, like the backend team wanted to go with a REST API, which is fine and works great and makes total sense. And then for the project I'm currently working on, they just use GraphQL for their communication, their API. So to be honest, I have some experience with GraphQL, but I'm not a total expert of using it. But I think that was also quite lucky for me, because then we had at this client, we had some problems with fetching data like get really slow queries, really slow mutations and things like that. And because I was so new, I kind of had to read up everything about about GraphQL. Like, what are we doing wrong? Why is this so slow? And because of my, like, I don't know, top-down view in this case, I could spot out some anti-patterns that, yeah, were not helping. So I wouldn't call me an expert in GraphQL. I just found some issues we had, and they are quite simple issues. But I mean, most of us devs are not like people who create new frameworks or whatsoever. I mean, we also have day jobs. We make normal, stupid mistakes. At least I am.
I'm right there with you. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that was quite nice to summarize some of these mistakes so others don't have to do them as well.
Perfect. So, to me, it sounds like you kind of started using GraphQL more so as a result because kind of Gatsby was kind of going that way with things. And to use Gatsby, GraphQL was like something that you kind of needed to learn for that. And then, like you said, I would say a few years back, GraphQL was like super hot. Like it was the thing that everybody was using. It was the new way to do your requests and responses. It to me, maybe it's just me because like for my day job the last few years, we use like just a Django backend with a RESTful API. So I haven't been in the GraphQL world, but to me, it feels like GraphQL's maybe cooled off a little bit over the last couple of years, but it's still pretty regularly used. But kind of with what you mentioned there regarding kind of the anti-patterns with GraphQL. So I know one that you mentioned was regarding kind of overfetching. And I would say that with even like RESTful APIs, depending on how you structure like your React application and how you structure like, if you're doing any sort of caching or stuff like that, you can definitely run into overfetching issues as well. But I would be interested in kind of the kind of GraphQL side of things. What is kind of the problem with overfetching that people tend to run into when using GraphQL?
Mm-hmm. I mean, so when we are talking about overfetching, maybe for everyone, like overfetching means we ask for too much data and some of that data is not used in the front-end application. So our like response times are slower, our response sizes are larger than they should be because we don't really need that data. And I mean, at the beginning, we choose that, okay, in GraphQL, you're very flexible what data you get back. And so because of that, you can specify, okay, I want this field back and I want this field back. And when something in the front end changes that you don't need this field anymore, you can just remove it and you don't have to write like a new version of your endpoint. So by telling you that, this actually says, okay, we have no reason to have overfetching because we can easily just remove it in the front end and not ask for that data. And if you have like a RESTful API like you have with Django, you can, I mean, a backend dev needs to change the API. Maybe you need a new version of that API, of that endpoint. So it's way more complicated to do that. So could be the case that you say, okay, a little bit of overfetching is fine. But for GraphQL, I mean, yeah, it's so easy to like avoid it. And so this is the reason why it's really bad to have overfetching in the first place in GraphQL compared to REST, because it's easier to change. But mostly the concept and what you can do wrong is quite simple. It's just you ask for information that you don't need. And this can happen because you forgot to remove fields. So that's it. It's really simple.
Gotcha. So I know that in our application, maybe a year or so back. So I started out with front end, but I've been working basically more and more full stack. I work at a startup, so I basically do everything, which is definitely good. But I would definitely say that even with a RESTful API, you can run into a very similar issue. And you're exactly right. We had a case to where we were requesting some data, and we're including like this very large JSON field alongside that data. And that was making our responses just like huge. And it was making this kind of request response cycle take very long, because a good rule of thumb is the less data you send to the front end, the more quick your application is going to be, and the better that things are going to run. And we were just sending way too much data that we didn't need. So we had to kind of go adjust our backend endpoint to allow it to be customized a little bit to where it's like, okay, we're only going to send them this information by default. But then if they send like a, JSON is true query parameter, then we'll send them all the extra data, because sometimes we do need that. But it sounds like with GraphQL, you can more so control that from just the front end. So rather than from needing to go adjust the backend endpoint, you can just kind of change the structure of your request on the front end to exclude, in this example, that JSON field. That's going to make your response data a lot smaller, improving the overall performance of your application. Does that sound like I'm understanding that correctly?
Yeah, perfect. So, as you said at the beginning, right, you have that kind of object that defines what you get back in your query, and you just have to remove the field there. That's all, like what you summarized.
Gotcha. And you also mentioned a type pattern as well of underfetching, to where maybe I'm assuming where this is going is maybe you're making multiple requests to where you could get all the data in a single request. But I'll let you kind of cover the pattern of underfetching.
Yeah, so that was the perfect description what underfetching is. So you're asking for too little data, and because of that, you have to do like several more requests to get the missing data. And we had some we wrote some code that wasn't that clever. But sadly, this happened because we didn't know like how to use filters and sorting in GraphQL, because you can actually, you can ask for different fields, but a lot of fields you can also do like ordering and sorting already, ordering and also like filtering. And so our situation was kind of maybe to give you an example. So we think about the GitHub API. So the GitHub API, you can get like different repositories. Each repository has different issues and so on. And what we did is, okay, we want to get all the issues that have someone that's already assigned to that issue. So someone is already working on it or planning to work on it. And how we did it was we got like all the issues with the assignee ID. And then what we did is we filtered on these issues and checked, okay, does that issue have an assignee ID? Yes, it has one. Then we use that one. If it doesn't have one, we filter it out. And then we used these IDs, mapped over them, put each of the IDs in a component, and in each of the component, we queried the data again. And the problem by doing that is if you say, okay, I was at least clever, I said, okay, we only want to get like the first 100 issues. And then we filtered them out. Okay, in the end, we have 70 issues that have like an assignee. And then we use these IDs of these issues, and in each of the component, we make an additional query. So in the end, we have 71 queries. And it can get even worse if you don't say, okay, I only want to get like the first 100 issues. If you get like all the issues and then filter on them. So it could be worst case, you have 2001 queries. So that's really bad. Because, why is it bad? Because for each query or each request and response, you have some overhead. And if you have more and more queries, the overhead gets worse and worse. And also like the caching is a bit more difficult when you have like several of these queries. So how we fixed that then eventually was actually quite simple, because what we did is we used the filter by statement in our resolver, and then we said, okay, we only want to get all the issues that actually have someone working on it. And so what we then had to do, we didn't have to filter it anymore. We just mapped over these issues as we did before, but now we put in like all the information that we want to display about the author that is working on this issue. And we didn't have to do any more queries. So, first of all, the performance got way better in this case. Our backend was also happy that we didn't spam it with thousands of requests. And also the code got a lot more cleaner because now you don't have to do this filter statement. Okay, this is just a one-liner. It's not that difficult. But you don't have to define that query in the component as well. So in the end, you probably have like 10 to 20 lines less of code that you have to maintain. So yeah, big win for us and really simple if you know how to do it. But we didn't know it at that time.
Absolutely. And I'm just laughing because it's like stuff like that's so easy to make mistakes like that, to where you accidentally make hundreds of requests that you didn't need to make, just because of like little tweaks in how you kind of structure your code and stuff. And that might have prevented you from needing to like, I'm not sure if this was in a React application, but it might have prevented you from needing to put like a use effect at the top of that component to go get that data on mount and stuff. And generally, when you're able to avoid use effects and some of the more complex hooks, that's also beneficial. I think so anyways. So yeah, mistakes like that are super easy to make. And sometimes, I've even had it before to where like we'll make a request and we'll get the data back and we have all the data we need. So we didn't necessarily like underfetch any data, but we then didn't just like pass that data to the components that needed it and re-requested that data in those components and stuff. So like it's stuff like this, stupid stuff like this it's easy to do if you're not paying attention to it. So maybe just covering one more here. I know we're coming up on time here, but maybe just covering one more of not using mutation return values. So what kind of issue are you kind of referring to here, and how do you maybe not run into this anti-pattern?
Yeah, this is also, it's an easy one as well, but we can kind of go a bit deeper in this one. So with GraphQL, you can, the same way you define in a query what you want to get back in your query, you can also do that in a mutation. So after a mutation was successful, you get back some data and you can specify what data that is. And the cool thing about it, especially if you use like a GraphQL client library like Apollo GraphQL, you can then use these data that you get back from your mutation and just set that in your GraphQL cache that you're using in all of your components. And so by using these return values, you don't have to do like an additional query, because what we did is, okay, we updated some data, the mutation fired, the server said, okay, yeah, that was fine. And then we got a response back, it was good. And what we then did in the front end, we made an additional query to get back the updated data. So we did like one more request and response that was just unnecessary because we could have used the return values of the mutation.
Totally. And this is an issue in RESTful frameworks as well. Like we've had it time and time again to where we'll do stuff like this, to where you do an update and then you don't see, it updating UI on the screen. So you're like, okay, after we update, we need to re-request this data to make sure we get the updated data. And it's like, we didn't need to do that. All we had to do was return the now mutated data and just update that at our UI rather than making a full kind of additional request response cycle. So it sounds like a very similar thing that you guys were running into with GraphQL.
Yeah. And like in the end, we also noticed we could even improve that a bit more because, okay, yeah, we can get the return value back. But what we then did, we also did optimistic updates. So, which basically means we already updated the data in our state manager or like cache manager, whatever you call it in GraphQL. We updated the data as soon as the user clicked submit and our validation was fine. And we didn't wait for like the server response. And then when the server said, okay, yeah, I returned you some data, we just overwrote that again. And it should be like the same data as your user updated. But that made like the apps blazingly fast because like they got updates straight away. So we took that a bit further, the return values of the mutation, by doing like optimistic updates, which is quite nice.
Yeah, those can definitely increase the perception of your app just being super quick and super responsive, doing those optimistic updates. And like you said, as long as you have like some sort of validation as well that's kind of going on, rarely is it going to probably be the case to where that update doesn't actually occur and persist. But I'm sure, there's different things that you could show for your UI and UX that demonstrates, hey, this update failed because of this. So you might have to revert that optimistic update. But yeah, very cool, and definitely a way to increase the perception of performance in your application for sure. So I think those are really good, like 3 anti-patterns there. I know that you have a couple more in kind of the talks that you give and everything. So maybe first, where can people maybe go to find your talks or to find you online to make sure they kind of get the rest of those kind of anti-patterns or any other kind of, I'm not sure how much other kind of content you tend to produce and stuff, but if there is anywhere that people can kind of go, where should they go to kind of follow you?
Mm-hmm. So I mostly post just on LinkedIn. I just write some normal posts about React topics, GraphQL topics, TypeScript topics. I often also write blog posts about similar topics. Also sometimes about, I don't know, some performance optimization for developers, like using, for example, NVim or Vim key bindings, things like that. But they can go to LinkedIn and also my website, hermannstoffer.dev. I also have all my talks there. And sadly, from Cologne, my talk wasn't recorded, but my talk in Amsterdam was recorded, but sadly, it's not on YouTube yet. So if it is available, I will post about it on LinkedIn and also on my website. So you can also see like the 2 remaining anti-patterns that we didn't cover today.
And I think on your website too, I know what I did is I downloaded like a PDF from one of your talks and looked through like your slides and stuff. And you could at least get like what the content of the talk is and get an idea of what some of the anti-patterns are as well. So I would definitely recommend doing that as well for people listening to this and interested in that. So awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I definitely agree with all of your kind of anti-patterns that we went over here today. Definitely like, pretty like simple things to solve and not like super complex things, but also things that are very easy to do within your applications unless you're aware of what you're doing, like very easy things to do to kind of slow down that performance. So thank you so much for coming on today. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Thank you, Ryan, for having me here.